What's up, everyone? If you've never used Amon's whips before, you need to give this build a try. It can be a lot of fun and put out a ton of damage. We're using the recent fix to black out some of the skills from the Infinite Ordnance Amon and Catastrophe to stack crits and dots to do the most damage possible. Using Slippy, we can stack our overshield while proccing big dots to help melt enemies. With that, let's break down the skills and gear. Alright, going over gear, we're going to start out here with the Grenadier class mod. Now, I'm not a huge fan of doing class builds that don't have legendary parts to them because you can't really farm for them. But unfortunately, that's the way it is with Amon, seeing as his Grenadier and his Icebringer are two of the strongest when you can get them in the right roles. So with that, the one on the left is Grenadier. The skill on the right of that class mod is Blackout, and that's what we're focused on. So try to get a +5 in that. You can see I only have a +4, still works really well. On the right is Icebringer. The middle skill is Tail of the Comet. That one also does a ton of damage. So if you wanted to just focus on the most damage possible, then do the Icebringer with Tail of the Comet +5. But if you want to do the most consistent damage, then go with Grenadier with Blackout. And the reason for that is in the skill tree, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Moving on, we're using a Watch for Dinner, but we're going to start talking about the Slippy. The reason I'm talking about Slippy first is because if you, for some reason with this build, if you use Slippy or you melee, you automatically refill your overshield using Watch for Dinner. So Slippy can give a lot of damage, and what you'll see here is I have no overshield right now. I'm going to throw my Slippy. I've automatically sunk my overshield, but then I've also procced my Tail of the Comet dots, my Blackout dots, and then I have Electrical Fire, which is giving me fire dots. So Slippy is the best for this build. Moving on, I'm using a triple bypass, and this has amp on it. You don't need to amp it. You'd be better off with something like Enrage, but a triple bypass is necessary for our specialization with caffeine. The reason this is important is because if you didn't know, Amon's action skill cooldown is like 48 seconds. So even with 3 shots of triple bypass, you're still going to have some downtime in mobbing situations where you don't have your action skill up. That's where you're going to use your Slippy. Slippy is going to deal the most damage outside of your action skill. Now going forward, we're going to use a Transfuser Malawan enhancement paired with a Stellium shotgun. The reason we're going to do this, if you haven't seen, Jolt's did a video on how this works, so I won't go into too much detail. But essentially what you can do is use your Slippy or your action skill, which is the whips, and if you proc a shock dot on them and that kills them with the shock dot, then that is going to be transferred to another enemy as if it were from the gun. So it works with both Slippy and your action skill, and that just gives us more damage in a greater area around us as we're mobbing. Last piece of gear is going to be the Watch for Dinner. We're using this to get the bonus shock damage. That's going to help us with our overall throughput of damage. For our firmware, we're using 2 Gadget Ahoy, 2 Googe FCs or Googe AFC, whatever it is, and 1 God Killer. So God Killer works for both bosses and badasses. That's a 10% damage multiplier for us. Googe is going to give us action skill cooldown rate and skill damage. So using our whips action skill is going to, like I said, is going to have that 48-second cooldown. So we want that extra cooldown and then the skill damage. Then lastly, Gadget Ahoy, because the whips are doing ordnance damage, we're going to want the ordnance damage bonus from Gadget Ahoy, and then the cooldown rate just helps us in the downtimes that we don't have our action skill up. We'll be able to use Slippy to be able to do a lot of damage to mobs and to bosses in order to allow for what'll be about 5-6 seconds of time where you don't have your action skill even after using a triple bypass. Now starting with the blue tree, I'm going to go over Firewall, the Forge skill. So if you don't know this, I'll put it on screen kind of what the rotation is, but what you'll want to do for bosses, put out Firewall, then throw your Slippies. That'll bring up the procs for Blackout and Tail of the Comet and Electrical Fire. And then that'll also boost our overshield. Then you can start using your Forge skill, which are your whips, which are doing Forge waves every time you hit your action skill button, and they're dealing cryo ordnance damage. And then we're pairing that with some key skills here, one of which is Tail of the Comet, which anytime we deal ordnance damage, there's a chance of doing a cryo dot, which is 30%. So now if you want to do the most damage, you could use that Icebringer class mod, and this would probably do more damage than with Blackout. But what we're doing is Blackout because whenever ordnance critically hits, it shocks an enemy, and then that is a guaranteed shock dot. And then on top of that, it adds a percentage of crit hit chance based on the skill points. And then that plays into what we have in our red tree, which is things like catastrophe. Whenever we apply shock to an enemy, we gain critical chance. And whenever we apply burning, we get critical hit duration, which plays into electric fire. Whenever we burn an enemy, we also shock them, and vice versa. So essentially what we're doing is we're using blackout to trigger things like our crit chance, and that's going to trigger fire dots, which will then trigger crit damage. These all boost our whip damage. Next, we're going to use Cackling Aegis. So this gives us increased status effect damage and ordnance damage. Once again, we're proccing so many dots, we want that extra status effect damage. The ordnance damage is going to be boosting our whips, and then because we're using Slippy and Watts for dinner, we're able to get overshield much faster and much more consistently, and that's going to give us higher shield, so we'll get extra status effect and extra ordnance damage. We're also going to go into status effect damage with Wield the Storm and status effect duration. So that helps us because if you didn't know, a shock dot is very powerful, but it's also very short. So getting that extra duration just gives us maybe an extra second of time where it ticks off some damage. Then we're going to boost our incendiary damage. This is because of things like electrical fire, which are doing incendiary dots. And then increased skill damage from titanium knuckles. And then also we're going to increase our status effect application chance here with Wrath of Nature. So all of these play into each other. These I have two from the class mod, which are going to give us some ordnance cooldown. That helps during times when your action skill cooldown is ticking down. So now you have the ability to use Slippy more often. And that's a skill tree. So now moving on to specializations. Ideally, I would want right here, I would want I am a gun, honed mine, full spectrum arsenal, and fragmentation payload. That would do the absolute most damage. Because the action skill is what we're using with the whips, they are doing ordnance damage. I'd like to double dip, but as you can see, I'm only level 55. So if you have enough of the specialization points, that's what I would do. You could also go down this road and probably do more damage in best defense and then follow this tree down with the gadgeteer tree. However, you won't be able to get down to now with caffeine, and with a 48-second cooldown, I really find it important to be able to get our action skill back as soon as possible. Slippies can do a ton of damage in the downtime, but you're still limited on those as well. Even with the extra charge, Slippy only comes with 3, and there's a chance of killing yourself with a Slippy, a lot higher chance of killing yourself with Slippy than there is with your action skills, so that's why I went with this. And that's it for this whips build. Hit that like button if this helped you, and press subscribe for more Borderlands 4 builds. See ya!